A boy poses in costume on Halloween 1910. When enlarged, the photo reveals something chilling behind him. Have you ever looked at an old photograph and noticed something that shouldn't be there? Something that makes your skin crawl? Today I'm going to tell you about a Halloween photograph from 1910 that has baffled experts for over a century. A simple portrait of a young boy in costume that, when examined closely, reveals a detail so disturbing that it still defies explanation. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And hey, before we dive in, I wanted to mention that I'm developing another channel focused on historical mysteries. Check the link in the description if you're interested. Margaret Sullivan never expected to find anything unusual when she began digitizing her great-grandmother's photo collection in the autumn of 2019. The 68-year-old retired librarian from Hartford, Connecticut, had inherited dozens of old photographs, most dating back to the early 1900s. Among them was a sepia-toned image that would soon capture the attention of photo analysts, historians, and paranormal investigators worldwide. The photograph showed a young boy, approximately 8 years old, dressed in what appeared to be a homemade ghost costume, a simple white sheet with eye holes cut out, typical of Halloween celebrations from that era. The boy stood in front of a Victorian-style house, his sheet slightly askew, revealing a proud smile underneath. Written on the back in fading ink were the words, "William, Halloween, 1910. Margaret had seen the photo countless times throughout her childhood, displayed in her grandmother's parlor. But it wasn't until she scanned it at high resolution for the family archive that she noticed something peculiar. When she zoomed in to examine the details of the house's architecture, she saw it, a figure standing in the shadows behind William. At first, she thought it might be another child in costume, perhaps a sibling playing a prank. But as she enhanced the image further, adjusting the contrast and brightness, the figure became clearer, and Margaret's blood ran cold. What she saw defied logical explanation. The figure appeared to be a tall, gaunt person dressed in dark, tattered clothing. But it was the face, or rather the absence of one, that made Margaret's hands tremble. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth, pale surface, like a mannequin or a mask. The figure's arms hung unnaturally long at its sides, and its posture suggested it was leaning forward, as if moving toward the boy. Margaret immediately called her sister Helen, who lived in Boston. Helen, a skeptic by nature and a retired physics teacher, suggested there must be a rational explanation. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, a photographic artifact, or even a scarecrow that happened to be in the background. But when Helen examined the high-resolution scan herself, she had to admit that the figure looked disturbingly human and disturbingly wrong. The sisters decided to research the photograph's history. They knew William was their great-uncle, their grandmother's older brother, who had died in the influenza pandemic of 1918 at the age of 16. But they knew little about the circumstances surrounding this particular photograph. Margaret reached out to the Hartford Historical Society, where she had volunteered for years. The Society's photography expert, Dr. James Chen, was immediately intrigued. Using specialized software, he analyzed the image for signs of manipulation or double exposure, common techniques used in early photography to create ghostly effects. His findings only deepened the mystery. The photograph appears to be authentic to the period, Dr. Chen reported after a week of analysis. There's no evidence of double exposure or post-development manipulation. The figure in the background appears to have been present when the photograph was taken. Word of the mysterious photograph spread through academic circles and online forums dedicated to historical mysteries. Amateur investigators began digging into Hartford's history from 1910, looking for any incidents that might explain the figure. What they found sent chills through the growing community of people fascinated by the image. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. To understand the significance of the photograph, we need to step back in time to Hartford, Connecticut in 1910. The city was experiencing rapid industrialization, with factories sprouting along the Connecticut River and immigrant families flooding in to work them. The neighborhood where William's family lived, the Sullivans of Maple Street, was a middle-class enclave of Victorian houses, each with carefully manicured gardens and wrought-iron fences. Halloween in 1910 was quite different from today's celebration. It was primarily a children's holiday, focused on harmless pranks, homemade costumes, and small gatherings. Store-bought costumes were rare. Most children relied on their mother's creativity with sheets, old clothes, and face paint. The practice of trick-or-treating as we know it hadn't yet taken hold. Instead, children would attend parties or participate in parades. The Sullivan family consisted of parents Thomas and Mary, along with their 4 children, William, 8, Agnes, 11, little Dorothy, 5, and baby James, 2. Thomas worked as a supervisor at Colt's Manufacturing Company, while Mary managed the household. They were, by all accounts, a typical American family of the era. But 1910 was also a year marked by strange occurrences in Hartford. Local newspapers from the period, which Margaret and her team of amateur researchers painstakingly combed through, revealed a pattern of unusual events in the months leading up to Halloween. The Hartford Courant reported several instances of mysterious figures seen lurking near children's playgrounds and schools. These reports described tall, thin individuals dressed in dark clothing who would stand motionless for long periods, watching children play. When approached by adults, these figures would simply walk away without speaking, disappearing into alleys or wooded areas. On October 15, 1910, just 2 weeks before the photograph was taken, the newspaper published a particularly disturbing account. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood of Pearl Street reported seeing a faceless man standing in her backyard at dusk, watching her children through the kitchen window. When her husband rushed outside with a lantern, the figure was gone, leaving only unusually long footprints in the garden's soil. The police dismissed most of these reports as Halloween pranks or the overactive imaginations of people getting into the spirit of the season. But the frequency and consistency of the descriptions were remarkable. Multiple witnesses across different neighborhoods described similar figures, abnormally tall, wearing dark clothing, with faces that were either covered or strangely featureless. Dr. Chen discovered another intriguing detail while researching the Sullivan family. In a diary entry dated November 2, 1910, just 3 days after the photograph was taken, Mary Sullivan wrote, "William has been having terrible nightmares since Halloween. He keeps talking about the tall man who followed him while Thomas was taking his photograph. Thomas insists he saw no one, but William is adamant. He says the man had no face and moved in a strange, jerky manner, like a marionette. I've had to sleep in his room these past 2 nights to calm his terrors." This diary, preserved in the Connecticut State Library archives, provided the first direct connection between the photograph and the strange sightings reported throughout Hartford that October. But it also raised new questions. If Thomas Sullivan was taking the photograph, why didn't he see the figure that appeared so clearly in the image? And why did William only mention it after the photograph was taken? The research team made another unsettling discovery in the Hartford Courant archives. On November 5, 1910, the newspaper reported that 3 children had gone missing in the Hartford area during the week following Halloween. While 2 were eventually found, having run away from home, one child, 9-year-old Samuel Morrison from the North End, was never located. The last confirmed sighting of Samuel was on Halloween night, when he was seen walking alone near Bushnell Park, still wearing his costume, a white sheet ghost outfit remarkably similar to William's. As news of the Sullivan photograph spread across the internet in 2020, it attracted the attention of both believers and skeptics. Professional photographers, digital forensics experts, and even former FBI analysts offered to examine the image. Their findings, while not conclusive, added layers to the mystery. Rachel Hartley, a forensic photographer who had worked on cold cases for the Los Angeles Police Department, conducted a thorough analysis using the latest enhancement techniques. Her report, published on a popular true crime blog, detailed several anomalies in the photograph. First, the figure's proportions were unusual. Based on the height of the house's windows and door frames, Hartley estimated the figure to be approximately 7 feet tall, exceptional for 1910, when the average American man stood about 5'7". The arm-to-body ratio was also off, with the arms appearing to extend past where the knees should be. Second, the shadow cast by the figure didn't match the lighting conditions in the rest of the photograph. While William and the house cast shadows consistent with late afternoon sun from the west, the figure's shadow seemed to fall in a different direction, as if lit by another source entirely. Third, and perhaps most disturbing, was what Hartley discovered when she examined the figure's face under various filters. Using infrared simulation software, she revealed what appeared to be a texture beneath the smooth surface. Not quite features, but suggestions of where eyes and mouth should be, as if someone had pressed fabric tightly against their face. Leave a comment below about what you think of this story so far. Meanwhile, Dr. Marcus Webb, a professor of folklore at Yale University, offered a different perspective. He pointed out that the faceless figure motif appeared in several cultural traditions, particularly in immigrant communities that had settled in Hartford during the early 1900s. The Irish had stories of the Dullahan, a headless horseman. Eastern European Jews spoke of the golem, which sometimes appeared faceless. Even Native American tribes in the Connecticut River Valley had legends of shape-shifting beings that could appear human but lacked proper faces. Dr. Key Webb explained in a video interview, "What's interesting about the 1910 Hartford sightings is how they seem to blend elements from multiple traditions, suggesting either a shared psychological phenomenon or something that transcended cultural boundaries." The Connecticut State Police Cold Case Unit even briefly looked into whether the photograph might be connected to any unsolved crimes from the era. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Moss spent weeks cross-referencing missing persons reports, unsolved murders, and strange incidents from 1910-1911. While she found no direct connections, she did uncover a pattern that had been overlooked by contemporary investigators. Between September and November of 1910, there were at least 12 reports of attempted child abductions in the greater Hartford area, Lieutenant Moss revealed in a podcast interview. What's striking is that in every case where the child escaped and could provide a description, they mentioned the perpetrator being unusually tall and having their face covered or obscured. Some said it was wrapped in bandages, others described a smooth mask, and one child insisted the person had no face at all, just skin where features should be. These historical police records, long buried in archives, suggested that the figure in William Sullivan's photograph might have been more than just a Halloween prankster or optical illusion. But who or what was this mysterious presence stalking the children of Hartford in 1910? As Margaret Sullivan and her growing team of collaborators dug deeper into her family's history, they uncovered information that had been deliberately hidden for generations. The breakthrough came when Margaret's cousin Patricia, living in California, remembered a locked trunk in her mother's attic that had belonged to their mutual great-grandmother, Mary Sullivan. Patricia shipped the trunk to Margaret, and its contents proved both illuminating and troubling. Among the usual family memorabilia, birth certificates, wedding announcements, and faded letters, they found a collection of documents that Mary Sullivan had apparently kept secret from her children and grandchildren. The most significant discovery was a series of letters between Mary Sullivan and her sister Catherine, who lived in New York City. These letters, dating from November 1910 to March 1911, revealed a side of the story that had never been told. In a letter dated November 8, 1910, Mary wrote, "Dearest Catherine, I must confide in someone, and Thomas refuses to discuss what happened. The photograph he took of William on Halloween captured something that shouldn't exist. We've hidden the picture away, but William continues to have nightmares. He draws pictures of the tall man constantly, horrible sketches that I burn in the fireplace. What troubles me most is that I've begun to see him too. Last night I woke to find a figure standing at the end of our bed, perfectly still. When I nudged Thomas awake, it was gone, but I know what I saw. The height, the strange proportions, the absence of features. It matches what William describes and what appears in that awful photograph. The letters revealed that the Sullivan family had considered moving away from Hartford, but decided against it when the sightings seemed to stop after Christmas 1910. However, another letter, dated February 15, 1911, contained even more disturbing information. "Catherine, I've made a terrible discovery. While cleaning the attic, I found a collection of old newspapers that the previous owners had left behind. Among them were clippings from 1871, nearly 40 years ago, describing identical sightings in Hartford. Tall figures with no faces, watching children, disappearing when pursued. The articles mentioned that the sightings stopped after a factory fire killed several workers at the Jewel Belting Company. What if these appearances are cyclical? What if they return every few decades? I've been researching at the library, and there are similar accounts from the 1830s, though less detailed. Always the same, figures appearing in autumn, focusing on children, then vanishing after some tragedy. The trunk also contained a manila envelope marked "Destroy after my death" in Mary Sullivan's handwriting. Inside were 6 more photographs from Halloween 1910, all showing William in his ghost costume. In 3 of them, the figure was visible in different positions, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always present. In one particularly chilling image, the figure appeared to be mid-stride, as if walking toward William. Most disturbing of all was a photograph not of William, but of the figure itself, taken from an upstairs window. The image was blurry, as if the subject had been moving, but it clearly showed a tall humanoid form standing in the Sullivans' backyard at dusk. A handwritten note on the back in Thomas Sullivan's script read, "November 3rd, 1910. It returns each night. God help us." These discoveries raised profound questions about why the Sullivan family had kept these events secret for over a century. A final letter from Mary to Catherine, dated December 1911, provided some insight. "We have decided never to speak of this again. William's nightmares have finally ceased and life has returned to normal. But we will keep the photographs as evidence should anyone need proof in the future. I pray that day never comes, but if the pattern holds, Hartford may see these visitors again in another 30 or 40 years. Let those who come after us be warned, even if we choose silence for the sake of our children's peace of mind." If you're still watching and finding this story fascinating, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Margaret Sullivan's decision to make the photograph public in 2019 had consequences she never anticipated. As the image circulated online, people from around the world began sharing their own experiences and historical findings. What emerged was a pattern that stretched far beyond Hartford, Connecticut. A researcher in Germany discovered photographs from Munich in 1923, showing similar figures in the background of carnival celebrations. A historian in Japan found accounts from the 1890s describing faceless watchers during autumn festivals in rural villages. Indigenous oral histories from across North America included references to tall beings that appeared during harvest season to observe human children. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a psychiatrist specializing in mass hysteria and collective delusions, offered one possible explanation. Throughout history, communities under stress have reported seeing mysterious figures, often described in remarkably similar terms. The Industrial Revolution brought massive social upheaval, urban crowding, and new anxieties about child safety. These faceless watchers might represent a manifestation of collective parental fears. But this theory couldn't explain the photographic evidence or the physical traces left behind. The footprints mentioned in 1910 police reports, the disturbed soil, the occasional piece of dark fabric caught on fence posts. Nor could it explain why sightings seemed to follow a pattern, appearing every 35 to 40 years in the same locations. In 2021, something happened that reignited interest in the Sullivan photograph. Children in Hartford began reporting encounters with tall figures, watching them from a distance. Parents dismissed these claims until a security camera at Bushnell Park captured footage of a figure matching the historical descriptions, standing motionless among the trees, observing a children's playground. When park security investigated, they found only unusually deep footprints in the soft earth. The Hartford Police Department, remembering the cold case research from 2020, began taking the reports seriously. They established a task force to investigate what they carefully termed suspicious individuals, targeting children. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Moss, who had studied the 1910 cases, noted the similarities were impossible to ignore. The security footage, though grainy, showed enough detail to cause concern. The figure stood approximately 7 feet tall, dressed in what appeared to be layers of dark, weathered clothing. It remained perfectly still for the entire 47-minute recording, not even swaying in the wind that clearly moved the trees around it. Most unsettling was the head area, where a face should have been visible. There was only a pale, smooth surface that reflected no light. Local news coverage of the modern sightings led to an unexpected revelation. Thomas Chen, an elderly Hartford resident, came forward with a story his grandfather had told him in the 1950s. His grandfather had been a contemporary of William Sullivan and claimed to have seen the faceless figures himself as a child. More importantly, he had preserved a journal from 1951 describing a wave of similar sightings in Hartford that had been suppressed by local authorities to prevent panic. The journal contained a theory proposed by a group of amateur investigators in 1951. They believed the figures were connected to specific locations in Hartford where traumatic events had occurred. Sites of industrial accidents, cholera outbreak mass graves from the 1840s, and Native American burial grounds disturbed by urban development. The theory suggested these locations served as thin places where something could cross over, particularly during autumn when the veil was thinnest. Chen's grandfather had mapped these locations, creating what he called the Hartford Convergence Map. The sites formed a rough pentagram across the city, with the Sullivan House on Maple Street sitting at one of the points. Each location had a history of repeated tragedy, fires, accidents, disappearances, all following the 35-40-year cycle. This revelation prompted Margaret to organize a more thorough investigation. She assembled a team including Dr. Chen from the Historical Society, Detective Lieutenant Moss, a documentary filmmaker named Jason Reeves, and Dr. Amelia Fosteri, a professor of quantum physics from MIT, who had developed theories about dimensional overlap. Dr. Fosteri's involvement brought a startling scientific perspective to the investigation. If we consider the possibility of parallel dimensions or alternate realities, these figures might be observers from a realm that occasionally intersects with ours, she explained during a team meeting. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change our physical landscape, it fundamentally altered electromagnetic fields, created new chemical compounds, and introduced vibrations and frequencies that hadn't existed before. These changes might have created rifts or weakened barriers between dimensions. The team's investigation led them to interview dozens of families who had experienced encounters during the 2021 wave of sightings. The accounts were remarkably consistent. 8-year-old Emma Fitzgerald drew pictures that were nearly identical to William Sullivan's sketches from 1910. Her mother, Sarah, reported finding Emma's bedroom window open on cold nights, with her daughter claiming the tall friend needed to come in, but couldn't figure out how. 12-year-old Marcus Washington described communicating with a figure through a form of telepathy. "It didn't have a mouth, but I could hear it in my head," he told investigators. "It kept asking about our dreams, like it didn't understand what sleeping was. It said where it comes from, they don't dream." The team discovered that all the children who reported encounters shared certain characteristics. They were between the ages of 5 and 12. All showed signs of high creativity or sensitivity, and many had recently experienced some form of trauma or major life change: divorce, death of a pet, moving to a new home. It was as if the figures were drawn to children in transitional emotional states. Margaret decided to return to the Sullivan house on Maple Street. Now converted to apartments, the building's current owner, Robert Hernandez, was initially skeptical, but agreed to allow an investigation after seeing the historical evidence. What they found in the basement validated Thomas Sullivan's fears from 1910. The fortified room Thomas had built was intact, its concrete walls inscribed with symbols that matched those in the photographs from the trunk. But more shocking was what ground-penetrating radar revealed beneath the fortified floor: a series of tunnels that predated the house itself, possibly by centuries. The tunnels appeared to connect to other points on Chen's grandfather's convergence map. Against the advice of local authorities, the team received permission to explore the tunnels. What they found defied explanation. The passages were carved from solid rock, using no identifiable tool marks. The walls were covered in the same symbols found on the Sullivan property, but these were far older, some possibly predating European colonization. In one chamber, they discovered what appeared to be observation posts, alcoves positioned at child height, with clear views into what would have been Native American settlements, then colonial homes, and now modern basements. The implications were chilling. Something had been watching Hartford's children for far longer than anyone had imagined. The documentary filmmaker Jason Reeves captured something on his equipment that the naked eye couldn't see. Using a full-spectrum camera designed to capture ultraviolet and infrared light, he recorded fluctuations in the tunnel that suggested movement, even when nothing was visible. The patterns matched the proportions of the figures described in witness accounts. Leave a comment below about what you think of this story so far. As news of the tunnel discovery spread, Hartford experienced a surge in reported sightings. Parents formed neighborhood watch groups, children were kept indoors after dark, and the city considered closing parks early. The panic that authorities in 1951 had tried to prevent was becoming reality. Then, in December 2021, just as suddenly as they had begun, the sightings stopped. No new reports, no security camera footage, no terrified children drawing faceless figures. The pattern held. After approximately 3 months of activity, the figures vanished. But the investigation had revealed something that couldn't be ignored. Dr. Fosteri's analysis of electromagnetic readings taken during the active period showed anomalies that spiked precisely when sightings were reported. These readings were consistent with theoretical models of dimensional intersection, suggesting that the figures might indeed be visitors from somewhere else, not extraterrestrial, but extra-dimensional. The team made one final disturbing discovery. In the deepest part of the tunnel system, they found what appeared to be a viewing chamber. Unlike the observation posts, this room seemed designed for someone to look in rather than out. On the walls were hundreds of small alcoves, each containing a different object: toys, clothing, photographs, all clearly from different eras, all belonging to children. Among these artifacts, Margaret found something that made her blood run cold: a small tin soldier tarnished with age. It matched exactly a toy visible in one of the Sullivan Halloween photographs, a toy William had been holding before the photograph was taken. The implications were clear. These figures didn't just observe, they collected. Professor Novak's research, which Margaret had continued to study, offered a final piece of the puzzle. In his last letter to Mary Sullivan, dated March 1911, he had written, "Mrs. Sullivan, I believe I understand now why they watch the children. They are not malevolent in the way we understand it. They are researchers, anthropologists of a sort, studying human development at its most crucial stage. Children represent potential, change, growth, concepts that may be foreign to beings from a reality where such things don't exist. The tragedies that follow their appearances may not be their doing, but rather a consequence of their presence. When dimensions intersect, the fabric of reality weakens. Accidents become more likely, diseases spread more easily, and some individuals, perhaps those most sensitive to their presence, may slip through the cracks entirely. We are not dealing with predators, but with scientists whose very existence in our world causes instability. They observe until the damage becomes too great, then withdraw for decades until the dimensional barriers heal enough for another visit. This theory, written over a century ago, aligned disturbingly well with modern findings. The 35-40-year cycle might represent the time needed for dimensional barriers to recover from each incursion. The focus on children could be an attempt to understand human consciousness at its most formative stage. The faceless appearance might simply be how beings from another dimension appear in ours, incompletely translated across realities. Margaret Sullivan found herself the keeper of a secret that spanned centuries. The evidence was overwhelming, yet impossible to prove definitively. The photographs, the tunnels, the artifacts, the consistent witness accounts across cultures and centuries all pointed to something that mainstream science couldn't accept and authorities couldn't address. As 2024 arrived, Hartford returned to normal. The tunnels were sealed on the city's orders, officially due to structural concerns. The artifacts were relocated to a secure facility for historical preservation. The security footage was classified as part of an ongoing investigation. Life continued, as if nothing had happened. But Margaret knew the truth. In approximately 35 years, around 2055, 2060, they would return. The cycle would continue as it had for centuries, possibly millennia. Children would again report tall figures watching them. Parents would dismiss their fears as nightmares, and eventually, evidence would accumulate that couldn't be ignored. She created a foundation dedicated to preserving the evidence and preparing for the next occurrence. The Sullivan Foundation, operating quietly, collects reports, maintains archives, and develops protocols for the future. They work with families who have historic photographs, helping them examine backgrounds for anomalies. They've found dozens more images from around the world, all showing the same tall, faceless figures, always watching children. The foundation has also begun working with child psychologists to develop ways to help children who encounter the figures. They've found that acknowledging the experiences rather than dismissing them leads to better outcomes. Children who are believed and supported show fewer long-term psychological effects from their encounters. Dr. Fosteri continues her research, working on equations that might predict exactly when and where the figures will appear. She's identified subtle changes in local magnetic fields that precede sightings by several days. If her work succeeds, future generations might have warning systems in place. Detective Lieutenant Moss, now retired, serves as the Foundation's security advisor. She's developed protocols for law enforcement to follow during the next cycle, procedures that acknowledge the phenomenon without causing panic. Her work includes training materials that frame the figures as unidentified persons of interest, rather than supernatural entities. The photograph itself has become more than evidence. It's become a symbol William Sullivan's innocent smile, contrasted with the lurking figure behind him, represents every child's vulnerability to forces beyond our understanding or control. It reminds us that our world contains mysteries that resist explanation, that challenge our assumptions about reality itself. Some nights, Margaret sits in her study, looking at the photograph and wondering about her great-uncle William. He lived only 8 more years after that Halloween night, dying in the influenza pandemic like millions of others. But his mother's letters suggest those years were marked by a sensitivity to things others couldn't perceive. He would sometimes stop mid-play, staring at empty spaces, claiming someone was there. He drew constantly, filling notebooks with sketches of tall figures and strange symbols. Was William changed by his encounter? Did proximity to these dimensional visitors leave him partially connected to their realm? The questions multiply with each piece of evidence uncovered, each connection made across time and space. The Hartford Convergence, as researchers have come to call it, may be just one node in a global network of observation points. Similar clusters of sightings have been identified in Prague, Munich, Tokyo, and dozens of other cities that experienced rapid industrialization. The figures seem drawn to places where human society transforms quickly, where old ways collapse and new ones emerge. As our world faces unprecedented technological change, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, genetic engineering, some members of the Foundation worry that we may be approaching a period of intensified observation. If the figures are truly studying human development, our current era of exponential change might draw their attention like never before. The Foundation has also begun investigating whether communication might be possible. If these are intelligent beings conducting research, perhaps they could be engaged diplomatically. But attempts to leave messages at known sighting locations have yielded no response. The figures remain as they have always been, silent observers, present yet unreachable. One thing has become clear through all the research. These entities have been part of human history for as long as we have records. Cave paintings in France show tall, elongated figures watching groups of children. Egyptian hieroglyphs include symbols matching those found in the Hartford tunnels. Medieval manuscripts describe watchers without faces appearing during times of plague and change. We are not alone, but our companions are not what science fiction prepared us for. They're not invaders or saviors, but something far more unsettling. Patient observers who view our children with an interest we can't fathom, through eyes we can't see, for purposes we can only fear. The Sullivan photograph remains the clearest evidence of their existence, a single moment frozen in time when the hidden became visible. It serves as both warning and invitation, warning us to protect our children from forces beyond our understanding, and inviting us to acknowledge that our reality is far stranger and more complex than we dare admit. As Margaret often tells Foundation members, they've always been here, they'll always be here. The only question is whether we choose to see them. Now, and somewhere, in dimensions we can't perceive, tall figures without faces continue their eternal watch, studying our children across the centuries, waiting for their next opportunity to observe, to collect, to try to understand what it means to be human. A concept that may forever elude beings who exist outside the stream of time and change that defines our existence. The mystery endures, the watch continues. And every parent who has ever felt that chill of being observed, every child who has ever insisted someone was there when the room appeared empty, may have brushed against a truth too large and strange for our world to contain. The Sullivan photograph is more than a piece of evidence. It's a crack in the facade of normal life, revealing depths we're not equipped to explore. It reminds us that childhood fears of things lurking in the shadows may be more than imagination. They may be genetic memory, an evolutionary warning about the watchers who have always been there, studying us from the spaces between worlds, and they will return. The pattern is clear, the cycle unbroken. When they do, we'll be more prepared than our ancestors, armed with knowledge accumulated across generations. But will it be enough? Can any preparation suffice for entities that exist partially outside our reality? Only time will tell. Until then, the photograph waits in its climate-controlled vault, a silent testimony to the Halloween night when Thomas Sullivan captured more than just his son's costume. He captured proof that we are observed by intelligences vast and cool and unsympathetic, watching our children with purposes we can only guess at, from dimensions we can only fear. The mystery of the Sullivan photograph endures because it exists at the intersection of the tangible and the inexplicable. We have physical evidence, multiple photographs, historical documentation, eyewitness accounts spanning centuries, yet no satisfactory explanation for what these figures are or what they want. Some researchers continue to pursue scientific explanations, mass hallucinations triggered by environmental factors, elaborate hoaxes perpetuated across generations, or misidentified natural phenomena. Others embrace supernatural interpretations, interdimensional visitors, manifestations of collective unconscious fears, or entities that exist just beyond our normal perception. What we know for certain is this. In 1910, Thomas Sullivan captured something in a photograph that shouldn't have been there. His son William saw it, felt its presence, and carried that memory for the rest of his short life. The figure in the photograph remains unidentified, its nature unexplained, its purpose unknown. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this mystery is its cyclical nature. If the pattern holds, Hartford and possibly other locations around the world will see these visitors again around 2055, 2060. Future generations may have better tools to investigate, clearer cameras to document, and new theories to explain. Or they may find themselves exactly where we are now, staring at evidence of something that exists in the shadows of our understanding, watching our children with intentions we can only fear to imagine. The photograph itself now resides in a climate-controlled vault at the Connecticut Historical Society, available for researchers to examine. But Margaret Sullivan keeps a copy in her home, a reminder of the Halloween when her great-uncle William smiled for the camera, unaware of what stood behind him in the gathering dusk. As you contemplate this story, consider the old photographs in your own family albums. Look closer at the backgrounds, the shadows, the spaces between buildings. You might be surprised or disturbed by what you find lurking there, waiting to be discovered. Some mysteries are meant to be solved. Others, perhaps, serve as warnings. The Sullivan photograph may be both, a puzzle that reveals just enough to make us question what we think we know about the world around us, and a reminder that some things are better left unexplained. But one thing remains certain. Every Halloween, when children don their costumes and venture out into the night, there are parents in Hartford who look a little more carefully at the shadows, who study the backgrounds of their photos a bit more closely, and who remember the autumn of 1910 when something watched from the darkness and was caught on film. If you enjoyed this mysterious journey into the past, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your theories about what the figure might be, or if you have any similar stories from your own family history. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next exploration into history's unsolved mysteries. Thank you so much for watching.